Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's really nice to see you again. This Shabbat, Shabbat Hagadol, as it's referred to throughout the Jewish world, the Great Shabbat is called that because it's the Shabbat before Passover. And many of us, amidst the Passover holiday, are preparing. We're turning our houses upside down, we're cooking, we're cleaning, and we're getting ourselves ready to celebrate. And my family has always taken Passover incredibly seriously. As a child in Philadelphia, I remember taking what felt like hundreds of trips up and down the basement steps, bringing all of our boxes of Passover dishes, the appliances, the countertops even, up the stairs, through the hallway, into the kitchen, and then needing to schlep everything that wasn't for Passover back down. And in interest of full disclosure, I did almost everything in my power to not have to clean. I avoided it like the plague. The pun is definitely intended there, by the way. But avoiding it used to be much easier. When I was a student, I straightened up my room a little bit, but I would sell all of my chametz, and then I would go home for the entirety of the holiday. I would plan to arrive right before the Seder began, so at that time all of the prep was done. And then I would leave the second the holiday was over, because I had to get back to class, and there would be no time for me to be able to undo or turn the house back over. But now, living in a house with my family, we have 2 kids, and we're literally here all of the time. There's no basement, but we have a garage, and I feel like prep and cleaning for Passover is back with a vengeance. So earlier this week, I started reading some Passover guides that were recently distributed, specifically to help us better prepare in the time of COVID, and sure enough, the guides only made me more anxious about how I was preparing. One guide suggested that I needed to open up every book in my house and turn through every page and sweep for crumbs with a feather. They even provided with an illustration on how to do that. And that alone would probably take years. Another guide had a few pages detailing how one should clean all of the chametz from the bathroom. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I usually try to avoid eating in my bathroom, and I'm not really sure how much chametz is in there. And a third guide insisted that I needed to wash and dry clean all of my clothes that I would be wearing over the course of the holiday. And to be honest, at first I thought that was ridiculous. Yeah, that was until this morning when I stuck my hand in my pants pocket and I pulled out the candy wrapper. Now, the Torah teaches us that for the duration of Passover, lo tochlu chametz, that on Passover we are not permitted to eat chametz, and the rabbis take that to an extreme. They build a bunch of fences, prohibition after prohibition after prohibition, to help ensure that we avoid chametz at all costs. And on Passover, chametz, it's toxic. We adhere to the rabbinic principle, eino bitul afilu be'elef, that even if it's 1/1000th of a tiny speck, the tiniest crumb of chametz can render an entire Seder meal unkosher. Now, every child in our Torah school can tell you that we eat matzah on Passover because the ancient Israelites didn't have time enough to bake bread when they were on their way out of Egypt. But that doesn't really help us understand the extreme lengths that we are encouraged to go through to avoid chametz and eradicate it from our lives for the duration of the holiday. And because there's somewhat of a vacuum in our understanding of chametz, many commentators offer creative interpretations and explanations. Some suggesting that chametz is even more powerful as an idea than as a substance. So this Shabbat, Shabbat Hagadol, the Shabbat before Passover, I want to share with all of you just a few of those interpretations in hopes of better understanding what it is that we are trying so hard to get rid of. Now, many interpretations focus on the surprising similarities between matzah, the food that we have come to love or are forced to eat, and chametz, the food which we need to stay away from. The Mishnah teaches us that the same 5 ingredients that are forbidden for us to eat in their leavened state, that define chametz, are the only 5 ingredients that matzah can be made out of. The ingredients are the same. The only real difference between chametz and matzah is how much time, care, and attention we spend preparing it. Now, in this regard, Chametz can teach us that if we're not careful, the things in our lives that are the most valuable and most precious, some of the most meaningful relationships in our lives, can become the most dangerous. Sometimes we take these things for granted, but we need to remember to be attentive to that which matters most, or it may become toxic. Similarly, matzah and chametz, they both contain, in different order, almost the same letters. Both have a mem and a tzadi. But the third letter in matzah is a hey, while the first letter in chametz is a chet. And if you know Hebrew, you know that the difference between these two letters is a small space that is left open on a hey and that is closed on the chet. Therefore, the difference between the ways the two words are written is just that small little speck of space in the hey. And I think in this understanding of chametz, it can remind us that sometimes something so small and insignificant can be the difference between enabling us to perform a mitzvah and bringing holiness into our lives, or throwing us off track and leading us down a different, less productive path. One Hasidic interpretation offered by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov suggests that chametz is actually our yetzer hara, our evil inclination. Chametz is what drives us to make poor decisions, and it makes sense that we want to purge ourselves from this evil inclination prior to celebrating the festival. Another different Hasidic interpretation suggests that just as chametz is leavened or puffed up bread, it can represent our somewhat overinflated egos. Our egos prevent us from opening ourselves up and making ourselves vulnerable. Getting rid of chametz and putting our puffed up sense of self aside for a week can enable us to be more open, trying new things, becoming closer to ourselves, one another, and God. And finally, the last interpretation that I want to offer you this morning is from Rabbi Eliyahu Klein's Mystical Haggadah. And he suggests that chametz is a spiritual obstruction. He said that yeast in the bread obscures the innate light that wishes to illuminate naturally. And according to Rabbi Klein, chametz is an energetic, psychological, and spiritual obstruction. And once we remove it, only once we remove it, can we see clearly, giving us a more transparent and direct path to being spiritually connected with God. Now, however it is that we understand chametz, whether it's a speck that throws us off track or an evil inclination, a spiritual obstruction, puffed up ego, or even just as a piece of bread, it seems to me that chametz is something that gets in the way. It's something that prevents us from doing mitzvot, from being as connected, as intentional, as spiritual, and even as clean as we want to be, and as much as we strive to be. And as much as I hate the idea of turning my house upside down and obsessively cleaning it, I think that it can be incredibly valuable to try to purge ourselves of the distractions that prevent us from being in tune with what's most important, and from grasping with the true meanings of the holiday. Whether we use toothpicks or feathers to clean out our books or our fridges, whether we send all of our clothes to the cleaners or maybe just vacuum, however it is that we decide to prepare ourselves and our families for Passover this year, my prayer for all of us on this holiday, where we celebrate the many privileges in our lives that come with being a free people, is that we can rid ourselves of the chametz that might be getting in our way, enabling us to experience what it really means to be free. Wishing all of you a Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbat of peace, a Shabbat of rest, and a Shabbat of rejuvenation.